Okay, let me back up and give you a little history about me. I was born after the war, and it's World War II. We've had several wars since then. All right, is it catching on to the tape? All right. So I was born after the war, and when it came time to go to school, my little sister had just died, and my brother was put into a tuberculosis sanitarium, and so I was sort of there, the only child at home, and no one had any time for me. They were grieving and they were upset about my brother, and so I was in kindergarten, and I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand what letters were and numbers were, and I could understand what they were. I could recite you my alphabet. I could count my numbers to 100 by the time I finished first grade or kindergarten. But I had no idea what they were. And if I could draw the numbers out, I could draw the letters out, but I couldn't tell you that that was an A, or that was a B, or that was a C, or you have a bus sound, a cuss sound, or that's a 2, and they could say a 2, and they'd put 2 fingers up, 2, and I'd go 2 fingers, and so what's 2 fingers? That was different from 2 frogs or 2 birds. I couldn't put the concept together, and so this went on for many years, and finally my brother gets out of the hospital, and our family is now almost calming down. He had tuberculosis and was there for 2 years. Instead of being a brother who was a year ahead of me, he was now a year behind me. And there was this big push to get him caught up and, get him at least into my grade, if not, ahead of me. But things just didn't seem to be working well for me because I couldn't read, and I couldn't do almost any kind of thing that to be put on paper. And the school district was upset, and my parents were upset, and everybody was upset except my grandmother. She wasn't, because she said, "Oh, she's fine. She's perfect. She'll be great." And that was one of the things that maybe made my life a whole lot easier, because there was some place to go when I didn't understand what was happening. So the school district I was in hired a special teacher to teach 3 of us how to read. And there was 3 of us were in 5th grade, and there was 2 boys, and they could read, but they couldn't read well, and I couldn't read at all. And so they hired this teacher. Her name is Miss Regier, and I get cry eyes every time I talk about her, because she was my savior. And she had some kind of technique that she knew, that she could equate what the letters were and what the sounds were, and those letters became no longer pictures, but they became actual symbols for reading. And I can't tell you how she did it, because I don't know. She just did it. And by the end of the 5th grade year, and they hired her after Christmas, and so this was in a relatively short period of time, I had mastered how to read, and I understood what numbers were. Now, granted that I was reading at kindergarten level, but I was reading, and that made a big difference. I think that they were thinking about sending me off to the school for the mentally retarded. And they joke about that. They would joke about that later on, that's where I was heading to if I hadn't learned how to read that year. But I don't think it was a joke. I think it was really something that they were thinking about. But anyways, so here I was going into 6th grade, and I worked with Miss Regier for a little bit during the summertime. And then she went off to New York, and I've never heard from her again. I had 2 postcards, and I still have those postcards from her. And then I just attacked 6th grade. I knew that everybody else in my class knew everything that was going on in the world. They read every newspaper, they read every book, they knew how to do everything. And I was so far behind. And so I just worked really, really hard. And by the time I graduated from junior high, they gave IQ tests to everybody, and I was able to take the test without any help. And I had a highest IQ in the school, and even surpassed most of the teachers, because they decided that was the year that they would all take them too. And they were totally amazed, and they called me into the office and asked me if I had cheated and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, I don't know how you can cheat on an IQ test. But anyways, but what I also realized is that not everybody knew everything. That I probably knew more than most of the kids in my 8th grade class, and maybe more than what the teachers knew, just because I've been working so hard to learn what all these things were. Then I went off to high school, went to a private boarding school in Chicago, and so I was away from home, but I had some really competent teachers that were gracious, and they wanted to push everybody as far as they could go, and so I got pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. But I could then read, and I could then do mathematics, but that was the only part of my life that was organized. I couldn't figure out how to put a light bulb in, and I still have problems with that. Overhead light bulbs particularly, and the sprinkler on my hose, I still have a problem with that too, putting the hose, connecting it with the sprinkler. But, I mean, to get across town, I have to look at bus schedules, and I have to read those, and I'd have to, in order not to be looking at the list and all the different transfers and things that you would have to make to go from Chicago, from the loop into the suburbs, I would always have to have that chart with me and be looking at it all the time and checking to make sure it was right. It was just like, how do you organize this in your brain, and how do you function with this? And I had no organizational skills for anything. I mean, my papers were always a mess. I mean, I knew what they said. I learned everything that I needed to learn, and I did well in school. But the whole aspect of, you've heard about teenagers not having their rooms clean and things. It wasn't just my room wasn't clean. My life wasn't cleaned. It wasn't organized. I couldn't filter anything, and that was a problem that I still fight with. And the older I get, I feel like I'm regressing, and those problems are much more dramatic now than what they were when I was in my 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, and the early part of my 60s. But anyway, so here I am, and my grandmother was writing down a list of things. And I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, I'm writing down a list of things I need to do. And it was like a bell went off. I went, "Oh, you write down a list?" And so I looked at her list, and she said, she was going to clean the bathrooms, and she was going to go to the grocery store, she was going to put gas in the car, and she was going to pick up Grandpa Dewey. And I went, wow. I said, "So this you do this all the time?" And she said, "I do it all the time." She said, "Okay, I make lists all day long." And so I started making lists, and that was a real saving grace for me, is that I could make lists, and then I would keep myself organized, and transfers and things like that. You'd think that after you've done something maybe 10 or 15 times that you would not be frightened that you'll make a mistake, but I was always frightened I was going to get off at the wrong stop. But having that little list in front of me that had all those stops that I would have to make was sort of the cure-all. And so I realized that I could do that. And why that didn't dawn on me before then, I don't know, but I guess that's part of my problem. Well, back when I was little, there was definitely news that I had problems, and they didn't know what the problems were, and so kids sort of shied away. I think their parents told them, "Well, she's sort of a wise little kid, I mean, smart aleck," and I never wanted to go to school because I never could succeed, and so I was perceived as sort of having problems, and still, as an adult who's a teacher and has compensated for most of the parts of dyslexia, or I have compensation skills, sometimes I just get so out of whack, and people, I think, wonder what's wrong with this lady, and I can just laugh it off now, but I think that what I see with my students who have learning problems, that people shun them, and they don't want to be with them. They're not quite normal acting, and so they're just not perceived very well. I fear for one of my students that she has become rather despondent because she has no friends. She's a sophomore in high school, and she has no friends. She's just an average-looking kid. She makes excellent grades, but she does have some disorders, and she's a person I pray about, and I'm concerned about, and I get in contact with her at least once a day to make sure that she's okay, because she's just sort of shunned.
Well, my illness, it started, I think, I'm not sure if that helped trigger what was already there in my system, what we didn't know. As I was growing up, I was like, I remember I was 4 years old, and my brother was dressing me, and all of a sudden when he said I look really pretty, and he just stood me up, when he stood me up, I fell. So we didn't know what was going on. Back in the day, if you're not like bleeding profusely, you're not going to the doctor. Back in that day, they had their little home remedies and things to take care of everything. But my mom came home. He was explaining to my mother that I wasn't able to walk. So they stood me up again, and lo and behold, I was able to walk again. So that was that. But as I began to turn 40 years old, close to 40, in my 40s, it's like 38, I can remember, and I tried to walk, and I tried to walk straight, normal walking, and I know I was going off to the left, and then didn't think anything of it, and I thought it probably was from a bee sting. I started limping because I'm allergic to bee stings. So I would limp, and I kept thinking it was probably had to do with the bee sting. And then one day I was at work, and I worked night shift, and I had this excruciating headache. If only way I can describe it, I've never been hit with a sledgehammer, but that's what it felt like if I had been hit with a sledgehammer. So I went to work one day, went to the hospital. One of my coworkers took me to the hospital in Ephrata, PA, and that's Pennsylvania. And when they did the testing, the doctor told me that I had bleeding in the brain. It was like a trickle of blood from the top all the way to the back. So he was surprised and whatever. Make a long story short, they kept me in, did all the tests, and the last test they had to do was through the spine, and that's how, with that test, they found out I had MS. So I'm thinking, with all the stress, my mother passed away, my dad passed away, I ended my marriage. I think all that stress triggered, and when it came back, when that MS came, it came back full force. I wasn't able to see, walk. I could talk, but my speech was like, my jawline was out of place. So it was really, really difficult. I was really sick for a long time. And I kind of went ahead of myself. Those symptoms started with the limp, the off balance, the gait. If I tried to walk normally, I either going to the left or going to the right. I was always active. When I run, I fall. I could just make a step and then I fall. And my sight started changing. I couldn't see the vision. My vision was really blurry. All my glasses, every other month, I had to change a prescription. And it does that now. That's why now I just stick to reading glasses, because I can get different strengths for $1 without paying all this money to get new glasses almost every month. But that's basically how it was. But trying to get back to, I think I wanted to get my life back, and it was really difficult knowing that, man, I raised 3 children and a husband, and I'm not going down like this, and that's what my attitude. I'm not going down like this. After your kids are grown, this is a time where, I can live life and do the things that I've always wanted to do. But it didn't happen that way. It was a struggle. It was really a struggle. I was depressed, suicidal, and I couldn't understand why, because I always was a healthy person. That incident in my childhood was the only incident I had when I was ill. And that's when they think that was MS. Back then when I was 4, but it just went into remission until all these major things start happening in my life, the negative stuff. So that's how I can, that's my memory. Even like now, trying to talk and try to stay focused, everything is almost like all over the place. I wanted to start, if I want to start at the beginning, my brain doesn't always help me there. So it's a struggle for me. I just couldn't think. My thought processes were just like crazy. I'm all over the place. It's like, remember the drawing where we used to do, I forget even the name of that, but it was a drawing. They would always, I think every elementary student had to do this particular drawing, and I don't know what it was, but you do it on this paper, you draw on this paper, you make all these crazy designs, and each one had a color. So it was similar to that. That's how my brain is. It's just like racing everywhere but where I wanted to go. It's thinking before I can even speak, and I'm trying to get it lined up with what I want to say. And that's depressing because you don't look like you with it or have it all together. But yeah, it's a hard struggle getting back, not having my life back, and for me, with my mental illness, I can see like I felt that my family members looked at me differently, uh, like I wasn't normal, and that kind of hurt. It's just some of the expressions on their faces after all of this, or they didn't take me. I guess what I'm trying to say, the things that I would say, it no longer appeared to be valid. I don't want to say they didn't take me serious, but there was no real concern, seemed to me like what I was saying was of any substance. I don't know, it just looked at me really different. I remember when I would be with my grandchildren, I would notice, especially my daughter-in-law, oh, they're wonderful people. All of my kids are wonderful people, and they love me, and that I know, but I saw a type of, they would watch me, and I would notice her watching me, or I didn't feel that they felt that they could be comfortable with me alone with the children. And if it wasn't for a very long period of time, which I can handle. I just felt something was missing. I was missing. Pieces of me was missing, and they were allowing me to notice that parts of me was missing, wasn't there any longer, by their expressions or little things that they do. Maybe they didn't know they were doing it, but that's how I felt. It's like I felt the distance. They were distant themselves from me, whether they just couldn't handle it, or that's their way of dealing with it, or they couldn't deal with it, and maybe that's how they were handling the situation. But all I know is, even, I'll give you another example. We were in class one day, and Miss Serta said, Darlinda, I want you to be, remember removing the chairs, but I'll make her circle. And that's one example that people need to know, that we know our limitations. We don't want them to, and it wasn't, overbearing is not the word, be so involved with us not being able to handle whatever we tackle. I wish they would just be silent. They can be noticed, they can notice us and pay attention, but only if we need that help. They don't have to address it beforehand. If you see that it might be a struggle, even though I'm trying, then come over. But not do that before you even have a reason to. And she was saying, Darlinda, I want you to be careful. And like I was telling her, I say, I know my limitation. I know what I'm capable of. I'll take care of myself. So that kind of stuff like that. Not that they mean any harm by it, but it's like they'll see a disabled person. Oh, let me get that door for you. Well, I need to be able to use what I have so I won't lose it. Even though they're being cordial and everything like that, we need to be able to do our own thing. And if we need help, we're going to ask. And that's the part that happens a lot. We already feel small and diminished in the things that we were able to do. But when somebody wants to do things for us, that kind of makes us feel like we're not capable of.
I think the people who have any kind of condition, that's just not what the normal is. They're treated unfairly. And people shy away from them, and they don't want to be around them. They don't know how to handle them, and they're actually a bit fearful of them. And, the people who, right now we have the gun legislation in front of this, they said anybody with a mental problem should probably not have a gun, and that's probably, might be a very good thing. But I have dyslexia, and I don't know that I would be a bad person to have a gun, except that I don't want one. And I don't know that, and I'm not particularly for the gun rules, and you can cancel this out if you want, if I'm getting too political here. But anyways, I don't know that just putting a label on a person should limit that person and to not being able to be as free or to do the things that he would like or she would like to do. I think any kind of inhibiting force is a bad thing. But I'm fearful for kids in schools, because if they have these labels on them, they get treated differently by teachers. They get treated differently by staff members, and they get. I mean, I'm talking about the cafeteria line as well. I was going through the line at Dunbar School here in Dickinson, and a little boy in front of me obviously had some problems, and that lady was just all sugar and spice to him. And then I come along, and she's just matter of fact with me, and then the little boy behind me who's not done anything wrong that I can tell, and she's really mean to him. And I thought, okay, so he was treated maybe a little nicer than some other kids were because he has special problems, but why should he be treated any different from anybody? We should all be pretty much treated the same. It's frustrating when I go to read labels at the grocery store. I'm looking at maybe 3 different boxes, and I'm looking at 3 different labels, and I have a hard time juggling it, physically juggling the boxes and things, because dyslexic people are often sort of klutzy. And I know I probably have backed up some people who want to look at those same boxes, and it's frustrating because they just huff, and they just have to come back to this aisle. And that just seems sort of unfair, that they could perceive me as having a problem, and they just don't want to deal with it. They're somehow or another above that problem. And that's frustrating. It's frustrating to the person that has the problem, and it's also frustrating, I'm sure, for everybody around us too.
Society perceives us like we're not able to do. Well, let's put it this way. I give you an example. That's the way I can explain it to you. I started this job, and I love working with my hands. And that particular job, you need the experience to be a handler. And that particular job was freight work. And my boss at the time didn't think I could do it, and he had a big question about it. So they were really, really struggling with giving me the job. And once they gave me the job, I was the best person they had, even with the disability, because at that time I was using my wheelchair. And basically, at that time, I used my wheelchair because my legs was weak. I also used my wheelchair to conserve energy. And before he left that store, and he came over and he said, Darlene, I really want to thank you, because it made me have a different attitude about a person with disabilities. And the thing that I'm trying to say that society needs to know, don't judge us before you give us a chance. You judge us by the way we look, you judge us by the way we walk, talk, can't talk, or whatever. But just give us a chance. And that's all we want to work. And the one thing that I've learned, and I've done research on this, people with disabilities, they are the most, and see, like now, even when I'm trying to talk, it's like I done lost much. But they are the most responsible, dedicated people that an employer can have on the job. I mean, that's what I want society to know. Give us a chance. We can work. We may not perform it the way everybody else do it. We may not be able to perform it the way we used to do it, but we've learned how to do it differently. And differently doesn't mean the job can't get done. More or less, the job will get done. And that's what I want them to know. Because right now, the rate for people with disabilities working, it is so bad. I've been trying to get work for so long. Anybody with a physical, mental, whatever type of disability, just give us a chance. We're going to work. And stop looking at us as if we can't accomplish whatever it is that we need to do on the job, because we can. We just have to do it differently, So that's my pet peeve. I want to work so bad.
Okay, I'm Gary Seal, and I'm the Director of Clinical Programs at the Transitional Learning Center in Galveston. And the TLC is a 38-bed post-acute brain injury rehabilitation center for adults with acquired brain injury. And I have a master's degree in clinical psychology, and a PhD in rehabilitation science. And I'm licensed as a chemical dependency counselor and a psychological associate. I'm the director of clinical programs here at TLC, and I've been in the field I've been in brain injury for 23 years, and been in the field of mental health for over 30 years. Okay, well, I work at a post-acute brain injury rehabilitation facility, so we primarily treat adults with acquired brain injury, and that's brain injuries from strokes or automobile accidents or gunshot wounds or things like that. And oftentimes a mental illness, for example, bipolar disorder, sometimes even ADHD, can set people up for a brain injury because folks with mental illness sometimes are impulsive in their actions. They don't think things all the way through, and so they may put themselves in situations where they get hurt and wind up with a brain injury. And so at our facility, we wind up trying to treat both at the same time. Treat the underlying, again, bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety disorder, at the same time giving them strategies to manage their life after brain injury. Yeah, there are a lot of motivations for not wanting to talk about mental illness. We recently completed a grant-funded project here at TLC with soldiers returning from Iraq and Afghanistan with mild traumatic brain injury from blast exposure. The big signature injury in those two conflicts is traumatic brain injury from improvised explosive devices, or IEDs. And the guys reported experiencing the blast and then having trouble sleeping, developing depression, anxiety, PTSD, and then the cognitive problems from the brain injury. Poor memory, poor concentration, not having difficulty multitasking, and those kind of things. And the problem is that the guys were really afraid to talk about it because if they reported symptoms, then they were pulled away from their unit and put in what's called warrior transition units or wounded warriors regiments. So they were separated from the units, and they felt like they were letting their buddies down. They weren't able to go back into combat with them. There was also a likelihood that they would not be considered for advancement in rank, and then they might be actually discharged early from the military. And so, again, there are a lot of reasons why people don't want to talk about mental illness, and again, that military cohort is a good example of kind of the negative stigma and the negative consequences that happen when people bring up the conversation. I think education is key, and getting the information to as many people as possible. And so there's a platform for that now with social media that hasn't been there in the past. And I think through social media that information can be passed on, and it's not nearly as expensive as an ad campaign, say, on television. I know that there are a number of folks with mental illness who have found ways to manage their condition and be very successful. And I'm talking about athletes, pro athletes. I'm talking about people in television and radio. Every walk of life, lawyers, teachers, and for those folks to be able to come forward and talk about their struggles and their successes and what's worked for them, and to let folks know that they're just like everybody else, may help relieve some of that stigma. And then for those who have severe conditions and who may not have access to treatment, giving those folks access to treatment, and maybe part of this Affordable Care Act will help do that. Give people an entry into the hospital or an outpatient clinic or to a therapist or to medications that may help. I think those two things should help tremendously.
In my internship and practicum experiences, I did a lot of work with people with special needs, and I mean, I don't really know. I mean, it is in the DSM-4, so I guess it is, technically a psychological issue. But like I've worked with quite a few people with autism, and then I did work with some other folks with other things that were going on. I worked with one kid with ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, and yeah, that's probably my the main stuff I worked with, because most of my stuff was in the school. So, but yeah, I mean, I worked a lot with kids with autism, and I mean, for them, I feel like, they did have to kind of be, public about it, because they, went to special ed, and so people knew, know, and obviously I feel like autism's a little bit harder to hide. And the other student that I worked with, the one with ODD, he also was in special ed because it was really impactful in his life. He had a really hard time participating in regular school. Honestly, like the more that I've seen, more so than my experience, like and the limited experience I've had as a professional, is more my experience around the military, and a lot of people returning back from combat, or they've done multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're coming back with PTSD, and a lot of them had traumatic brain injury and things that are not very visible. And that particularly, especially in the military, there's a huge stigma about receiving help. And they're trying to work on that, but it's still, a really big issue. I think that's part of why you've seen quite a few really horrific things that have happened, like that soldier who was hunting Afghanis for sport, and the soldier who left the base and just went out and started shooting people. I think because there's not a place for them to talk about it, they end up internalizing it, and then just, having a moment like that where they break down and do something really terrible. So, I think, the kids that I worked with specifically, they were getting a lot of help. And, they were in special ed for, their, for their disorders, but, so they were actually, receiving help. But, they were very stigmatized. These are kids that were outcast, and, the one person I can think of in particular, she had Asperger's, so, pretty much the only thing that was impacted was her social skills, and she wanted so much to fit in with everyone else, and, that just wasn't happening, and people were pretty mean to her. And she was working really hard to try to fit in, and she wanted that more than anything. And so, there's still, because she's different and she doesn't quite fit the mold, there was still a lot of stigma there for her. And, she definitely did not really have a group of peers that she, was close with and that she interacted with regularly. I think because it's stigmatized, and not only is it stigmatized, but like a lot of times it's hard for people to get coverage on mental health, insurance coverage. A lot of times it's not mental health treatment is not covered under insurance, and so I think that it's those kinds of things that, end up going untreated and unnoticed, and I feel like that's a lot of times why, there's also bullying and other things happening, but I think that's part of why we have, like, what happened in Pennsylvania. I think you look back and this person has clearly had some mental health issues happening that had not been addressed, and it seemed like his mother probably didn't have the support she needed either, and obviously we don't know the full story there, but it should be something where you are able to go and through your insurance get coverage to get to have some to see a counselor or to see a psychiatrist or whatever it is that you need. And I feel like the way our system is set up right now, that's not always the case, and it quite often is not the case. And so consequently you see a lot of people going untreated, and then it results in these really terrible things, and then now we're looking at gun control instead of actually addressing the flawed mental health system that we have. So I think because it's not visible and you can't, it's not like a broken arm or something like that where you can clearly see that there's a problem. It goes unnoticed and under the radar, and until something really terrible happens. And the thing is that, if somebody could get the treatment that they need before that happens, then those things, it would never come to a head like that. You would be able to keep things like that from happening. I think, when it comes to young people, I feel like as far as young people, I feel like they have the most chance of getting help because there are systems set up for them within the schools and various other, settings where they can actually get the help that they need. But the thing is that, first it has to be acknowledged and recognized. And like one of the biggest things that I've seen, like in the, my limited experiences, a lot of times parents aren't really willing to admit that, yes, my son or daughter has this issue. They don't even want to send them off for testing. So, because there's this big stigma attached. So, I think the first step in solving the issue is to talk about it and to take the stigma away. And, I think that, people feel really isolated. And the truth of the matter is that it's a lot of people are dealing with mental health issues. And so, I think all it takes is the courage to talk about it. And then other people will be like, man, I'm so glad they said that. I don't feel so alone. Because I think that's the big myth that people buy into, is that when they're dealing with a mental health issue that they're alone and feel really isolated. And that's not the case. But, the thing is that as long as the myth's out there and people buy into it, it's going to feel that way. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy at this point. But
Hello, I'm Mrs. Fry, and I'm an educator. I'm also a tutor, and I've taught in the public classrooms as well as in private schools. And I have a condition called dyslexia, and I would like for you to allow me to be me and not to be my condition, but to be who I am, a person who has overcome these things or is in the process of overcoming them and being able to teach other people to do the same thing.
My name is Darlinda Williams. I suffer from depression, I suffer from MS, and I suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder due to early childhood trauma. I would like everyone out there and I hope I can speak to those with disabilities, if you would just allow us to be us. And I'm asking personally for myself, I would just wish you would allow me to be me.